Welcome back, everybody. With Congress back in session, our next guest can give us an insider's view on hopes for another round of stimulus. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas is pitching his new pandemic relief legislation, the Recovery Act, this week. And Senator Cruz, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Becky. Good to be with you.
All right, let's back this up a little bit, because for anybody who's kind of watching, this is not fun watching the sausage get made as Congress kind of goes back and forth and the administration steps in from time to time, too. It sounds like right now the Democrats in the House are sticking with this $3 trillion number that they've thrown out. The latest I've heard from Mnuchin is that they would go up to as high as $1.5 trillion from the administration. But Mitch McConnell has had trouble just trying to get $1 trillion through the Senate. And so he has now got a new bill that's going to come out this week. It's a skinny bill, we can call it, $500 billion. And I guess I wonder, first of all, what do you think about in terms of what we need? Would you vote for the skinny bill?
Well, I expect to vote for the more targeted relief bill, but I'll tell you, we're going to take it up this week. I expect that we will get all or virtually all of the Republicans, but sadly, we're going to get very few, if any, Democrats. And to the sad reality of how Washington is operating right now is that we've got less than 60 days to an election, and I believe Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have made a political decision, and their decision is they don't want a deal. They don't want to pass anything. And so I don't think that Congress is going to end up passing anything between now and Election Day. And the reason I think they've done that is that Pelosi and Schumer have calculated that if they maximize economic pain, that if they have the most Americans home and broke and unemployed and pissed off, that benefits their party and it helps Joe Biden. I think that's a very cynical approach. And I'll tell you what we ought to be doing is we ought to be focusing on recovery. We ought to be focusing on helping the millions of small businesses that have shut down, helping them reopen, helping people get back to work. Millions of Americans are hurting right now, but unfortunately, there are a lot of Washington Democrats that are playing games instead of getting the economy moving again.
Senator Cruz, you have been a vocal critic of some of the things that are in that $3 trillion bill, things like banking perks for cannabis companies that are out there. I'm with you. Stuff like that should not get stuck to this. But you have your own pet project that has been added on to Mitch McConnell's skinny bill, and that is making sure that there is a tax credit for donations that are given to scholarship funds for private schools. I mean, I'm with you in terms of paring this down and just making sure this is only for relief. But there are critics in your own party who have a problem with that, the addition to Mitch McConnell's bill.
Well, you mentioned critics in my own party. Let's wait and see the vote. I think we're going to get all or virtually all the Republicans. And you want to talk about responding to the crisis. I'll tell you, all across the country, families are hurting and parents with kids are hurting. You know, Heidi and I, we've got two little girls who are 9 and 12. We have been distance learning since March. It is really tough, and it's especially tough. Look, with us, we have a two-parent household for much of the shutdown. I worked from home. Heidi worked from home. We had our fourth grader at the dining room table. We had our seventh grader in her bedroom. It's not easy for two parents, and for all the single moms, all the single parents that are struggling to hold on. What we've done effectively is millions of kids, their education is on hold. They're not learning the basic skills of reading and writing and arithmetic. And that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for those kids. Every day and every week they're left behind. It's a tragedy for those families whose parents aren't able to resume work again. And so I am a passionate advocate for school choice. And the targeted relief bill that we're going to vote on this week includes my legislation to create a federal tax credit, $5 billion a year, which even in Washington speak is a lot of money, directly focused on expanding choices for parents who are struggling. And it's a dollar-for-dollar tax credit to individuals, to corporations that make contributions to scholarship-granting organizations, giving scholarships for K through 12. And by the way, that's for parents to send their kids to public school, private school, parochial school, their choice. They can send them anywhere. That money can go to the public schools if the parents choose. But what it gives is the parents the power to choose. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see the Democrats filibuster it. And because they're happy, not only do they want people to be unemployed right now, They want kids to be staying home. And again, that's not the right solution. We need to have an urgency in Washington. Get people back to work. That's why my recovery bill cuts taxes, cuts regulations on small businesses, on job creators, because we've got millions of small businesses that are on the verge of going out of work. We've got millions of families who are really hurting right now.
Senator, I guess back to my point, I would like to see these things get passed for the schools and for small businesses as well. I don't think anybody likes seeing anything get hung up along the way on this. It sounds to me like there's no way that something is going to get done at this point. Do you agree with that assessment?
Unfortunately, I do. And, if we look back over the last 6 months, in March and April and May, we saw Congress come together in a bipartisan way. We worked together. We passed a whole series of major legislation, the biggest of which was the CARES Act. The CARES Act passed the Senate overwhelmingly. The vote was 96-0. I voted for it. Bernie Sanders voted for it. That is a lot of ideological diversity. The reason that we saw that bipartisan unanimity is it was the height of the crisis. It was right as the pandemic had struck, and Congress felt a real sense of urgency. What has changed in the months since then is we've gotten closer to an election, and I believe the Democrats have made the decision they don't want to cut a deal. I'll tell you, Republicans, the president has been looking to cut a deal from the beginning on this, but, you mentioned the Nancy Pelosi bill. Listen, Nancy Pelosi drafted a $3 trillion bill, and it was never intended to become legislation. Working in the Capitol, you learn the difference between something that's just a political showpiece versus legislation that actually can pass into law. The $3 trillion she drafted, she didn't talk to Republicans. She didn't talk to the Senate. She put together a Democratic wish list that's designed for them to campaign on. She knew full well it would never, ever, ever become law. What we're going to vote on this week is a much more targeted relief bill. The interesting thing is the Democrats agree with almost every element in it, and yet they're playing politics. And the reason is, look, next month we are expecting tens of thousands of airline furloughs. I've spoken with most of the major airline CEOs. They're looking at furloughing massive numbers of people. What I've tried to explain to the CEOs is, look, the Democrats want to see furloughs in October. Why? Because they think that people who just lost their jobs, who are sitting at home, will be angry, and the normal instinct is throw the bums out, and they think that means that helps Joe Biden.
Senator, do you support targeted relief or bailouts for the airlines? And what do you think the American taxpayer should get in return if and hopefully when the airlines succeed and their share price and value goes up? Should we become shareholders of those airlines?
I think it is in America's interest to have a strong and robust aviation sector. I think an enormous amount of commerce goes through aviation. And you look at aviation, much like restaurants, much like hotels, their businesses have been destroyed by government. It is the government that has stepped in and shut them down. It's not through mistakes they've made. Now, the reason the government did so is we have a global pandemic that is serious, that is dangerous, and we need to continue to focus on protecting those who are vulnerable. But at the same time, we can't utterly and completely destroy our economy. And so I think if a bill were moving, you would see relief for airlines included. But I think the Democrats want the furloughs. I think stopping the furloughs in October the Democrats view that as a political mistake. I think our urgency, so the Recovery Act that I introduced today, it suspends the payroll tax for 2020. What that means is for every employee in America, you get an immediate raise. Your salary goes up so that you can go home and provide better for your family. It also means for the employer, the cost of hiring employees goes down. That's a strong pro-growth incentive to hire employees back. Not only that, part of the Recovery Act says that the next $10,000 that you earn in 2020 is entirely tax-free. It's free of income tax. Why do you do that? Because, as you know, in economics, what matters is the marginal incentives of the next dollar you're earning. And we've seen 51 million Americans lose their jobs in the last 6 months. We should have a focused bipartisan urgency on getting those folks back to work.
On the payroll, Senator, on the payroll tax holiday, I completely appreciate the idea it would put more money in employees' pockets. But it's unclear that it's actually going to put more people back to work insofar as that the companies are only going to hire more people, A, if there's more demand, but this is still a health crisis. And so if you're a restaurant that can't operate indoors, whether you have a payroll tax holiday or not, it doesn't matter.
So let me make 3 points going in reverse order. Starting with the last one you made, I agree it's a health crisis. That's one of the reasons the Recovery Act has strong incentives for testing, has tax credits for employers to provide weekly testing for their employees, because one of the ways people will go back and feel comfortable going back is if they're confident they're safe and they're not endangering their health and safety and their families. I think we need to lean in vigorously on testing, and more testing. Secondly, you're absolutely right that people aren't going back to work unless we reopen the economy. And we're seeing at the state level, we're seeing Democratic governors, we're seeing Democratic mayors who are playing politics. They're shutting the economy down. It needs to stop. We need to let people go back to work. And starting with the very first point you said, where you said, well, gosh, if you lower the marginal cost of employees, you're not going to see more employees. You and I both took economics. You understand supply and demand. If you reduce the price, you're going to see demand go up. And in this instance, what we want to do is incentivize small businesses and employers bringing their employees back as quickly as possible. There's got to be the consumer demand. The business has to have a reason to have them back. But we also want to reduce the cost for the employers because, listen, there's not enough money in the building behind me to shovel trillions at this problem and fix it. The only way to fix it is to unleash the economy, is to let, our economy in January of this year was booming at historic levels, lowest unemployment in 50 years. We can get back to that, but not if government keeps mandating that everything stays shut down until Election Day. And here's a prediction, by the way. If, God forbid, Joe Biden were to win in November, the week after the election, all of the politicians saying shut everything down, all of the Democrats, I predict they will suddenly say, okay, everyone go back to work, everyone go back to school, everything's fine. That's not to say this isn't a serious problem, but it is to say they're playing politics with people's lives and life savings, and that's not the right thing to be doing.
Hey, Senator, can I just to push back on that cynical view of why elected officials are taking the stance they're taking? Obviously, there are some Democratic senators, particularly in areas that were already hit hard by coronavirus back in the spring, who are proceeding more cautiously. I don't know that any of them would be doing this to try and say that they're going to do this for an election for the president coming down the road, because they all have their own constituencies that are very angry. I've watched it play out here when it comes to the school reopening. I've watched it play out in businesses and restaurants reopening here. It's not an easy or popular decision to take a stand as an elected official and say we are not going to go back to opening, because people, frankly, are sick of the restrictions that have come with the pandemic. They want to get back to their lives as normal. I don't think they're taking these stances because they're playing politics necessarily. They may be worried because they've seen this play out before. And there are a lot of people that want to see the schools reopen, people back in them, businesses reopen. But some of that, this is a chicken and egg game where you're waiting for Congress to approve money to give the schools the things they need so that they can open safely. Or you're waiting for Congress to give the small businesses loans so that they can get the protections that they need to reopen their business safely. Some of this is just a chicken and egg game. You can't open safely until the money's there to do this the right way.
Well, Becky, look, I don't think it's overly cynical to expect that politicians in Washington, particularly career politicians who've been here forever, are going to behave politically on the eve of an election, particularly in this hyper-polarized partisan environment we're in. Beyond that, I think the Democrats are making it, it's not a crazy political calculation that they believe they will get cover from much of the media who will blame whatever happens on Donald Trump no matter what. So this week, you're going to see the Democrats filibuster targeted relief that's providing relief to small businesses and families, and tax relief and relief to parents who want their kids to go back to school. And the Democrats are going to filibuster it. They're going to block it. And most of the press coverage will be putting the blame on Donald Trump. Now that's just ridiculous. That's not, in fact, if you're actively filibustering something, you don't get to at the same time claim you're supporting it. And I think Democrats are playing games right now with people's livelihoods. And it's really wrong. And by the way, I will say my home state of Texas, if you look at Texas, a lot more Texans are going back to work than in other parts of the country, and we're seeing benefits from it. By the way, Texas is still too shut down. We need to open up and let people provide for their families, use common sense, follow sound science. That means do things like social distancing, but don't kill the economy.
Right, but Senator, real quick before we go, you made a comment,
Yeah.
you said, God forbid Joe Biden wins, and then you've talked a lot about playing politics, and I would love to hear your response to the critics who would say that the president has played politics with the pandemic from the beginning. You're advocating for testing right now. There were a lot of people arguing for testing a lot earlier than this, and the president was actively, publicly talking about how he wanted less testing. He was publicly talking about how he didn't want people wearing masks. He was not trying to model that as a behavior. How do you react to that when you talk about the issue of playing politics?
Look, I can tell you I've been calling for more testing and more testing and more testing from the beginning of this pandemic. And this pandemic is serious. Treating it seriously is the right thing to do. I can tell you back in January, I urged the president to shut down air travel into and out of China. And the president did the right thing. He shut down air travel into and out of China. Joe Biden immediately attacked him and called it racist and xenophobic. It was exactly the right thing to do. I chaired a hearing in the Senate where we heard expert testimony from CDC and the Department of Transportation and Customs and Border Patrol that said shutting down that air travel saved lives in America, slowed the spread of the virus. It was the right step to do. From the beginning, I've been calling for more and more testing. It's why my Recovery Act includes very substantial tax credits to help employers provide testing on a wide-scale basis. But the focus of the testing, listen, we know this virus doesn't impact all communities the same. We know that if you're very elderly, if you have very serious health ailments, this virus can be deadly. But for young people, for healthy people, the mortality rates are much, much, much lower. And what we have done and what we're seeing too many politicians continue to do is strangle our economy rather than letting the engine of the American free enterprise system help people get out of this Great Depression in which we find ourselves.
Senator Cruz, want to thank you for your time today. Good talking to you.